Blog Talk Radio.
The New York Times calls it anti-feminist. CBS News calls it victim blaming. Feminists from around the world call it names you would never repeat in front of your children. It's a voiceformen.com, a website for men, about men's issues, and a growing legion of men and women fed up with lies and corruption are calling it the de facto online source for news and information for men. VoiceForMen.com is the flagship of the men's rights movement. Much more than just a website, it's a straightforward reporting and analysis with no apologies. It is a growing media phenomenon, the birthplace of a Voice for Men radio online, and it is spreading a message of hope for men who thought there was nowhere to turn. If you have ever thought there was something wrong in the world between men and women, but you were afraid to say anything about it, come visit avoiceformen.com and find out what truth in action sounds like.
Anyway, we have Stardusk. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Very glad to have you here. The original intent, and we're going to follow through with it on this show, was to talk about MGTOW and to sort of get a more basic exploration of what it means and where maybe that phenomena is going. But before we do that, I wanted to bring up something you and I discussed briefly before the show, and that's the situation with Facebook. And for those of you that don't know, Facebook has recently capitulated to the demands, although I don't think they had to be pushed very hard given the makeup of that company. But they capitulated to the demands of a group of feminists who are outraged at the sexism on Facebook. Well, as long as it's sexism against women, they're outraged. And Facebook has agreed to revise their policy on hate speech and on sexism, and they are going to let feminists lead the way in training their personnel on who to boot off of Facebook, depending on what terrible things that they're saying. The really unfortunate but completely predictable part of this is that there is no other voice than feminists on this. They will be the ones deciding what is sexism and what isn't sexism. And, of course, they're going into this complaining about a lot of the images that are on Facebook, that they're being very either offensive to women or promoting violence. I went and checked out some of those images, and sure enough, what I was able to see, there's some pretty gross stuff there. Like I said, not stuff that we would have on A Voice for Men. But, of course, there's a whole world of anti-male and misandric memes and posts all throughout Facebook. None of that was even mentioned in any of the press stories about this. So, Stardust, you had the chance to sort of look over a couple of those articles that we have running now about this. What was your impression of what's going on here?
Well, I sound like an echo chamber of what you just said, but, whenever feminists have an opportunity to control something, they will. And I did mention that this idea that Facebook is somehow anti-women when the vast majority, maybe perhaps not vast, but certainly the majority of Facebook users are women. They're the one constantly messaging things, posting all sorts of things, pictures, what have you, and they make much more use of it. So the idea that your common woman, I'm not talking about the feminists here, is somehow offended by Facebook. But if we could somehow lead this into MGTOW, this is a good opportunity to offer up the idea of the men's movement and as a sort of a hydra cut off one head, they can cut off it's not going to do that much because you have other sources of information. It's not to say that this is a good thing, but I think that this could be a strong point and a point of resistance, even though, it's obviously terrible.
Well, you're not. I take it you're not buying the line that this is really about sexism.
Absolutely not. I could absolutely not. This kind of no. I totally agree with you. It's nonsense. But this is an attempt to control social media, which is something, of course, social media is arguably probably the most powerful medium out there these days. So it's no surprise that an active feminist group would want to be in control of it. And but this happens across the board. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I'm an avid computer game guy, and they've indirectly gotten their hooks in the industry there with the PC, cut this out, cut this scene out because it's sexist towards women and blah, blah. The list goes on. So anything that has any kind of social media aspect to it, it doesn't surprise me that they would get involved and attempt to control it.
No, and one of the things I was thinking about with this is that, and what I wrote about at A Voice for Men was that, this is not going to stop here. We've seen this going on in the secular community recently. Has had a lot of problems with the likes of Rebecca Watson, P.Z. Myers, that crew, riding roughshod over people's mouths. Then we have, what has historically gone on in places now like the military, the general workplace out there in the free world, and everywhere we're turning, like you just mentioned, the gaming community. The fucking gaming
it's
community.
It's awful there. I could rant about that for a lot. Yes, it's terrible. But I think this has been talked about I agree with you, by Bob Ross, Girl Rights Watch as well, that there seems to be a proclivity of feminists, women in general, when something, comic books industry is a classic example. It used to be the geeky thing without comparison, only quote-unquote geeks got involved. Then it became popular. Then women wanted it, and the feminists wanted it. And so any time something is popular and has the potential to have some kind of influence in society, that's when women and feminists tend to sort of get their hooks and their claws into it and want to start controlling things.
Well, it seems a pretty typical pattern in a lot of the lives of men that I've talked to for the past 25 years, that the idea, the theme of feeling gagged and controlled by women or by feminists, and sometimes we use that interchangeably, isn't anything new. But anyway, we're going to be talking a lot more about that later on the website. We're going to do some things. We want to do all we can to put the bam on wham, as it were, and really shine a light on this stuff. But I do want to be able to talk about what we came here for, and that's MGTOW. And
right.
to start off with, and I'd like us both to assume, just for the first few minutes, that we've got a room full of strangers listening to us who have never even heard of the MRM or MGTOW. So, and you're much more of an authority on the whole MGTOW concept than I am. So can you sort of, in a condensed version, what would you tell a stranger if you were trying to explain what MGTOW was about?
Okay, of course. First, let me decline the title of authority. I think, particularly in MGTOW, there are no authorities. There are people who might be prominent speakers for the MGTOW community, which is very disparate. But so anyway, I'm not an authority, but I am a man going his own way. I don't think it's all that complicated. I think MGTOW, for me, and like I said, it's different for a lot of people, it's just a rejection of a lot of societal expectations placed on men, expectations that often bring more misery than contentment. And it's the recognition that in rejecting that, you have a sense of freedom that is just very rare. As long as you're still essentially in the blue pill world, it's not possible that freedom. So it's essentially a rejection of roles that you're expected to carry out and fulfill. And of course, it goes beyond that. And I'm keenly interested in sociobiology and things of that nature, and I'm still interested in the interactions between men and women. But MGTOW essentially say, well, screw that. Going your own way.
Well, let's be a little more specific.
Decides what he wants to do.
What are the kinds of things that you would say that a good number of MGTOWs would reject?
Well, marriage right off the bat. I mean, marriage is. There's not a single MGTOW I've never heard this that would ever get married, and the reason is simple. I mean, the concept that even if you find a wonderful woman of great virtue, the fact is that the state has already given her a gun, whether she knows it or not. So she always has that gun. So that's just out of the question. Any sort of state-sponsored institution like marriage is just out of the question. Most MGTOW reject relationships. I do, as formal relationships. Some MGTOWs still engage in sexual relations, some don't. But I think generally speaking, relationships, formal relationships, marriage, absolutely are kind of off the table. And I know I'm called the greatest misogynist. I hate women, what have you. But I have female friends. I judge every individual, male or female, on a case-by-case basis. But I don't participate in relationships, and I'm never, ever getting married. And part of that for me is freedom. It's a desire basically to do the things I enjoy on my own time without. I mean, I've been in long-term relationships before, and I know what it's like. I'm never married, but you come home from work or you want to do something, and you're inevitably confronted with nagging and no, you should do this, and this is just all these kinds of things that you have to deal with traditionally in a relationship or marriage. MGTOW reject, and yeah, that's pretty much it, I think.
Well, is it all about relationships with women? Because one of the first things that came to my mind in talking about it was thinking about the grass eaters, the Soshikudanshi in Japan, who are I'm sure would be considered MGTOWs of a sort, in that they've checked out of marriage, they've checked out of relationships with women. They've also checked out of any sort of pursuit of like climbing the corporate ladder and fulfilling professional expectations that were normally placed on men in their culture. Do you think that's a part of the MGTOW movement, for lack of a better word, in the West?
I think so. I mean, I can only speak for myself and the men that I communicate with. Yeah. But I mean, part of bringing sociobiology, this whole dominance hierarchy. I mean, whether men do it consciously or not, we compete against each other. And the very successful man, perhaps he didn't have in his mind that he was doing it for the sake of acquisition of female reproductive resources. But that's really the basis of it all. And of course, most MGTOW reject the concept of dominance hierarchy because it tends to be more harmful to your fellow men, yourself, than anything else, and try to foster a spirit of brotherhood, essentially. Because competing for the sake of women isn't very helpful, and this is where we get the men throwing each other under the bus and what have you. So I do think that's part of it too, and those are part of those expectations. I used to be a translator, and I worked in an office environment, and I would never do that again, mind you. But because I think that's the other recognition, that kind of lifestyle often it doesn't make you content, and yet that's what you're told to do. Work your 50, 60, 70 hours, do that, and you're supposed to be happy with that. And the entire time you're noticing that you're not, and that's part of the realization that something is amiss with this. It's just not correct. And that's I would agree, that's part of it as well. This whole just doing things in your own terms, finding work that is more accommodating to your personal taste, irrespective of the dictates of society and women. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it also really interesting that you brought up the hierarchy, the male hierarchy, for lack of a better word, which, I think arguably, were it not for the male hierarchy, we probably wouldn't have had most of the advances in civilizations that we've had. And at the same time, in the modern milieu, that hierarchy seems to be more destructive in some ways toward the personal lives of men. than it ever was before. Is this something that you think that most MGTOWs are conscious of at least trying to reject, or do you think that just sort of happens on an unconscious level?
I think that's part of the conscious thing. And I'd like to actually, here I can publicly say it, I'm often accused of using the term flawed, both for men and women, that we have flawed. I've never used that term ever. But regarding what you're saying, what I would describe this as maladaptive, yes. I often say that we're running on hardware and software that's prehistoric hardware and software, and it had a great purpose back in the day, 20, 30,000 years ago, but it's become maladaptive. I don't think it's conscious. I think the MGTOW were interested in these concepts, learn about it, and they learn to apply it to their lives. But I don't think it's conscious. This is something that you have to have a kind of researching mind for, or at least be interested in, because that dominance hierarchy is really integral. I mean, to foster a sense of brotherhood amongst men. The same, because women have literally an in-group preference, which men do not have. It needs to be intellectual in men as opposed to women. Women, it's instinct, basically. Men need to do this on an intellectual basis, I think. So I do think it's conscious more than anything else, yeah.
Yeah, that was actually, you led right into the next question I had for you, is this something that men can fully escape from? Can they escape from their impulses to compete with each other? And I'm not just talking about for sexual access, although I really believe that all male-on-male competition is somehow rooted in competition for sexual access. But is it possible? Because I just want to paint a scenario for you here. What I've seen happen, what I see happen a lot in the men's movement, and whether that's MGTOWs or MRAs or whatever label you want to put on them, or even take away the labels and just talk about men that are going red pill and trying to break the bonds of corporate slavery and of marriage and of romantic, chivalric love, that sort of thing. You get a group of these guys together, and before long, somebody says something, then somebody else in the crowd says, you know what, I agreed with that except for that one word, and you really shouldn't have said that one word. And the next thing you know, the guy's saying, well, yes, I should have said that word, and the guys are at each other's throats. And we get what Zed called the circular firing squad. And I see that all the time. And so it honestly makes me wonder if men really can escape that hierarchy.
Yes and no. I don't think we can entirely, but I recall Barbara did a video a while back on the concept of healthy male competition. Now, no doubt this is also rooted in our prehistoric desire to compete in a dominance hierarchy, but it's a sort of a motivational thing. I mean, I think he gave the example of the Michael Jordan. I mean, and we're somewhat older, so remember, I mean, this guy was the best basketball player ever, and he created a milieu in that sport where everyone else, where other basketball players emerged as almost as good because they were all sort of challenged, and everyone sort of benefited from that as a result. And you could even see, I do my channel. My channel is there, hope primarily to help men, but I was inspired by Barbarossa, by you, by Man-Woman Myth, and you can see that also in some sense it's resembling a competition. But for me, it's more inspirational than anything else. So I think you could use a fine-tooth comb and sort of create a demarcation point. Say, yeah, this kind of competition, it might have its origins in the dominance hierarchy, but everyone is benefiting from it. We're gaining knowledge, we're improving ourselves, our abilities, whereas the kind of competition that's, say, endorsed by P. Ways or what have you, or more traditionalist mindsets, that's the negative destructive because it's very much targeted to the female. Whereas if it's simply for the sake of improving yourself intellectually, physically, when it comes down to individual interest, I think it's a more or less positive expression of that. But ultimately, yes, of course, it has its roots, so we cannot completely escape our biology. It's not possible.
I'd have to agree with that. Now, and this is a little bit of a controversial subject, but I I don't want to be disingenuous, so I'm going to have to bring it up. There was a bit of controversy recently, a little bit of conflict over a video that Willie Bumblebee did. And I wanted to bring that into discussion. Not that I want to dwell on it. I don't want to dwell on it because in some ways for me that video was nothing new. I do want to say for the record that in terms of listening to videos from people that I like and respect, and I do. I really like this woman a lot, and she does a lot of work for men and boys. But in terms of that video in particular, it's hard for me to imagine disagreeing with something more than I disagreed with that. I totally felt like it was on the wrong track. And I wanted to bring that up to make a point. A couple of points, actually. One, as much as I disagree with her, for those out there that say that this person shouldn't be at AVFM, I'm also going to say I dismiss that too. She's an activist that does a lot of work for men. I disagree with her. We have 20-some-odd people on a staff at AVFM now. I don't agree with probably all. I could probably find disagreements with all of them in one way or another. And as long as we stay consistent on the site about what we're doing, I don't make it my business to meddle in other people's affairs and try to tell them what to say away from AVFM because it's quite frankly none of my fucking business. I may not agree with it. I may disagree with it vehemently, and I do in more cases than just Willie Bumblebee. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out there that she's a part of this deal. I hope she examines that video, that statement, and maybe learns something from it. And if she doesn't, that's fine too. We'll move on from there. But the other part of this is I think, real important because there is pushback and pressure, even from sources close to home. And I think that's where maybe some real value in the video that she did, is that when you're a guy talking like you are about checking out from relationships, checking out from marriage, checking out from anything that would, put chains on your mind or your body, and living a life that's centered in freedom, this world doesn't like that shit at all. There's they'll send Bill Bennett to tell you to man up. Eve Ensler will tell you to man up. The feminists will tell you to man up. The conservatives will tell you to man up. And even occasionally, as we see some MRAs will tell you to man up. So what is that? I'm just curious about what that's like for you personally, living a life where you're going in one direction, and it's very much in some ways swimming upstream. Do you ever just say, screw it, I'm tired of this, I'll just go with the flow?
No, never. I mean, I've always been an oddball.
I think I knew the answer to that, but I wanted to ask.
I mean, in a way, being a Mango's way is an extension of my own oddballisms that have always been there. So no, but I hear it. I have colleagues at work. I work with a woman that I'm pretty friendly with, and I mean, she doesn't do it in such harsh. She's like, one day you'll find the one, and they just say, no, not really. No, I don't think so, because I've followed this dream before. I've been in long-term relationships, and just me speaking is one thing I couldn't stand was the constant expectations of me making sacrifice on the things I enjoy. And in an inequitable manner, and it's just an incredible feeling to come home from work or have a weekend where everything you do, it's very simple at the end of the day, is on your own terms. I mean, I do X, Y, Z, whatever. So I don't feel, because I know I've been down the other route. I know what it's like, and it's nothing that I enjoy particularly. But I did it for many years.
You've been down that road, Neil.
More or less, I can compare the two. I had well over a dozen years of serious relationships prior to going my own way, and I just, I know the comparison, and for me, it's just the freedom and just value as well. The other thing is that none of the conventional stuff ever made me particularly happy. I'm more content now, I'd say, overall. There are always things I'd like to improve in my life, but I'm more content now than I ever was when I was trying to be quote unquote successful and chase women and what have you. There was something amiss, and I realized that. And I've honestly, mentally, emotionally, never been better. And I think people usually leave me alone about it. But yeah, I mean, online, of course, there are a lot of trad cons, and I don't get a lot of traffic with feminists. It's mostly trad cons and I guess your everyday people who really don't get it. But it's okay. I mean, they're free to do what they want to do, and as long as they don't put a gun to my head, I'll keep on doing what I'm going to do. And even if they did put a gun to my head, I probably still would. So, yeah.
Excellent. I want to make a brief announcement here that in a few minutes we're going to be taking calls. I don't know how many calls we're going to get. We're doing this show at a very untypical time for us in the middle of the afternoon, where most of our callers are normally at work.
I might get some in Europe. I got some people on my channel, so.
But anyway, for those of you that want to call in and have questions for Stardusk or for me or for both of us, the number is 310-388-9709. That's 310-388-9709. I want to move into this in a little bit more, I think, touchy, complicated way, because I think one of the things, and this is a criticism that I have, not just of what I see in the MGTOW phenomenon, but also in the men's movement as a whole. I mean, and I'm addressing this to myself as much as anybody. It's not a session of finger pointing or anything like that. But one of the things that concerns me is that the idea of either celibacy or no connection whatsoever to women is not something that most men, I believe, are ever going to find in their realm of possibilities for life. There's a lot of guys that are going to want to do that. However, we have the problem that Stardust just laid out earlier. I mean, with marriage, I've been with the same woman 11 years. I won't get married because I figured out that getting married is you're marrying the state. You're not even marrying the person. And eventually the state's going to, when the relationship doesn't work out, or if it doesn't work out, the state's going to come for you and for your money. So that's a non-starter. But that doesn't mean, for me, I didn't rule out a relationship life. I feel like I'm going my own way as much as any guy. But we do have these problems. We have problems with an entire culture of women that have come to feel entitled and are arrogantly so. We have men that are beaten down into sort of, I don't really much like the word mangina, but I'll use it for lack of a better one. We have a culture of men that just kowtow to women shamelessly. We have dangers in the family court system, and we have dangers in the court system if you're not even married. I mean, there's the problems of false accusations, and everything else is like walking through a minefield. And so, for me, MGTOW makes perfect sense. The idea of really bad, and I don't mean just my brand of it, but I mean guys that just swear off relationships altogether. It makes sense. I can't argue the logic of that. But I know that some guys are going to want that in their lives. So what I'm sort of wondering out loud here is there a way in this zeitgeist to start rebuilding the relationship between men and women? Is there a way to find
theoretically, yes,
to build theoretically, and if so, how are we going to do that?
Do you mean interpersonal, so-called romantic relationships, or do you mean alliances in general? I mean, if you mean interpersonal, I could offer a theoretical framework within which one could do something like that. Because you're right, most men are not going to. Well, I mean, part of that is understanding human biology. really basic stuff like men like bust, hip, waist ratio, and women like guys with money and status. I think in order to, if a guy really wants to take the plunge, and most men do, this is something I've talked about very often, is that it's important that they come to terms and truly understand, really comprehend the way women view them. Because part of the problem is that men in general have been fed a very skewed form of basically fed the wrong worldview. They think that women view them in sort of semi-angelic terms, and they're all kind and caring, and they don't realize that women, biologically speaking, are primed for male resource extraction, and that's their primary interest, with some secondary interest going along with that. I think the human apes relationship is essentially a business contract. Marriage in earlier times was essentially a reproductive contract, male labor for reproductive resources. There's no reason why that might have changed in 2013. It's essentially the same thing. So if men were to entertain that idea, they need to do it with full understanding, with awareness, having taken the red pill, not the sort of glossy, rose-tinted glasses, the romance culture, as I like to call it. We're fed constantly these lies about the nature of the male-female relationship that have very little to do with reality. So that would be a basis. Now, whether people are going to want to go that route, but that's the only route I see, if at all. It's an honest basis for relationships that has its foundation in our biological motivations, rather than some sort of fairy tale that we've all been told and has been regurgitated 1,000 times.
Oh, yeah, and I'm certainly, I would be the last person to suggest to follow the fairy tale, but the question that comes to my mind is that if a man can take the red pill and essentially, not be led around by his dick and his programming, if he can find a way to break free of that and to live outside of those influences, at least for the most part in his life, is it possible that there are women that could do that too, that could put their hypergamous tendencies in enough check that we would not have to have, and I'm not talking about just fall in real true love and go skipping off into the sunset together, but could men and women meet each other on some level ground, understanding that women need to bring resources with them to a relationship, and as well as accountability and a few other things.
They have to exist, right? Never use the term every man, every woman. I always speak in generalities, but it's possible. But the question is, we have to look at the current culture and environment where women get a lot of these goodies. To answer that question, you also have to pose the question: would a man or a woman, if he's been accustomed to a certain lifestyle, in this culture, women basically getting whatever they want, be it from the faceless man, the state, or some lover, saying, "Here you go, darling. You're going to have to take a hit in quality of life, but it's the just and right thing to do." And so, I think it's really a moral problem as well. Most people, I suspect men as well, would not be willing to go that route and sort of give back the gifts they've received, if you will. And that's probably the largest challenge. But I also think, generally speaking, people might not like what I'm about to say, that it's often joked around that the female Borg consensus. Men, generally speaking, are much more individualistic than women are. There are always exceptions. Karen is always someone who comes to mind. Girl writes what? But
yeah, Karen's badass.
Women are much more of a sort of groupists, for lack of a better word. They tend to cluster, and men are much more lone wolves. And that lends itself much more to individualistic thinking as well as self-reflection, whereas oftentimes with women, self-reflection is sort of a amalgamation of the groupthink, of the board consensus, and say, well, and this is also how women judge men's attractiveness often. They're vetted by other women. So I think fundamentally it's possible, but it tends to be much more difficult for women because of their inherent tendency to think in groups, to see themselves as a group rather than as an individual.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, do you think there are things that men can do? And I'm not, certainly not asking for a discussion on game, but are there sort of techniques that men might employ to increase their odds of not latching on to the princess bitch and instead find that introverted, disconnected woman in the crowd who is perhaps at least socially withdrawn enough to be less influenced by the groupthink than others. And I wonder if this does fall on men in terms of who they're selecting. Because I do, despite the fact that women select for sex, I do think men have some say in who they partner with. Well, obviously, or you wouldn't be here.
Yes. Well, of course. I mean, men, generally speaking, I think men will admit that what women want, men give them. So men ultimately, I think it ultimately falls to men to change all of this, much more so than women, because men are the ones who put all this into place. The fact that we have a gynocracy in place in most Western countries is due to men following their primal instincts to give women what they wanted, or some women, or even the majority of women in some cases. But I don't know if I can answer this because it sounds dangerously close to sort of dating advice, and I'm very.
I feel like skirting the edge of that.
But I don't advocate dating in any way, shape, or form. I really think it's a crapshoot. It's I don't want to talk about Willy bundling much, but I do want to mention. She said that we're missing out. MGTOW are missing out. I talked to Karen about a week ago, and she started. We talked about stuff, and she said, "Yeah, I'm missing out too on winning the lottery." I mean, I think it's a crapshoot, and there's no way to really. And I'm not talking about game. I mean, any guy with a brain can get laid. That's not the point. But if guys want so-called quality relationships, I don't. I'm just too reluctant. I'm not going to give it dating advice because it's not something I would do, and I don't think there's a path towards that. I think you get lucky or you don't. But the question is, and the reason why MGTOW I think exists is that are you going to look for, as I like to refer to, the microbacterium in a haystack? I mean, it's a time investment. It's often a money investment. So that would be my argument. I honestly can't say I know the answer to that. I'm perfectly fine saying that.
Well, let me just, and this is all just in fun anyway. I mean, I don't take this conversation, at least this little part of it, terribly seriously, because you're right. I mean, for an MRA and MGTOW to give dating advice it was pretty comical, for one. But anecdotally, I just want to talk for a minute about my experience with this and sort of the path that my personal journey took me was after a bad divorce and figuring out that, whatever I had done my whole life with women, I just knew it was fucking wrong, right? How I picked them, the women I picked, what I did to try to impress them, and I'm not going to go into a long, drawn-out thing, but where I ended up with after that divorce was an attitude of two very, very key factors. One, I don't date. If you want to hang with me, bring your purse, and you can hang with me. And if you can't find your purse, then, hit the road. And also, if you can't find your accountability, hit the road. And it didn't cost me anything to go through, and I went through a lot of women like that who, many of them, I'm sure had in their minds, well, if I just go Dutch a few times, I'll eventually get him to cave in. And I saw that happen over and over and over again. And when they saw that I wasn't going to cave in, they lost interest. Hypergamy won, and of course I won because I stuck by my values. But I did end up with somebody that just didn't have issues with bringing her purse by sticking to my guns. I just wanted to throw that out there, and it's not dating advice, but that I do think that we can have an impact on where we end up, and that while that is a sort of a microbe in a haystack, I don't think it has to be an investment of energy or money in finding.
No, I agree. I think this is Stardusk giving me it's not dating advice, but one thing I think you can tell men, I think most men. No, I mean this is something I've talked about with a lot of guys. It's very rare. I mean, this is a good question. It's a question, it's sort of a test. You know, ask a woman what she likes about you, and most of the time, in fact, I've never heard anything else. Is I like the way you make me feel, or somewhere along those lines. They never talk about individual qualities you have, or it's very rare that you hear that. So maybe a woman who cites specific qualities you have that are important to you, maybe the way you think about things, or your discourse, or whatever, that could be a possible sign that she's actually paying attention, because most of the time, the guy is just kind of this nebulous thing, and I like the way you make me feel amounts to, well, no answer at all. So there are other things, in theory at least, you could use as sort of a litmus test. But as Karen once said, women are fickle, and you might find a woman who's perfectly fine paying her own way, but that's just part of the puzzle, right? I mean, there's just a host of other things that go along with it. So, no, I mean, it's a start, and certain questions, you could ferret out certain answers. I mean, I don't know, but I just feel very uncomfortable about it. I'm never...
I was sitting here doing the math in my head, and I was thinking, okay, willing to find her purse and values-based rather than feelings-based. Okay, now we're half of a microbe in the haystack versus a whole microbe, and those are just two areas. I know it's a difficult deal, but I do think that it's important on some level that at least in terms of discussion, and it may not be appropriate like on a MGTOW forum, it may be more appropriate more in a forum like a Voice for Men or something, that there really does need to be a discussion for men to have some smarts and to what they're going to do if they're just have decided that going their own way doesn't mean, sleeping alone every night, or it doesn't mean being without any sort of an emotional involvement with a woman. On our end, I think we're just cutting the conversation off way too short if we're not willing to at least discuss that. But that's certainly, I'm just speaking on my end of this, certainly not for anybody else.
And I think MGTOW I talk constantly about male and female nature, so even if a guy is MGTOW and still wants to date, at least he knows the deal to some extent. I mean, he hopefully, if he's watched some of my videos, has gotten the idea that all this Hollywood-based romance, fluffy nonsense, isn't really what's going on. So at least he has some base of knowledge, I guess, to arm himself with. But obviously, most men, it seems, cannot live without women. It is an addiction, and it's a naturally occurring addiction, and dopamine and all these other chemicals are involved. But
a whole bucket of them.
But yes. So interestingly enough, I'm planning on doing a video. They did this men actually produce more dopamine than women do, and it was cited in the study as men oftentimes be more susceptible to drug addiction, and there could be analogies in the fact that men often have much more difficult time recovering from breakups and marriages and all these other things. So I think the problem we don't like to talk about, and this is related to this, is that men, even though women are portrayed as being the vulnerable one, women recover far better and far more quickly from relationship breakdowns and marriage breakdowns than men do.
It's not even comparable.
Oh yeah, I mean, suicide right there. And it's often the case, I suspect, because women have, guys lined up and they can, the pair bonding chemicals, they can just go to the next guy and get rid of the old ones. But men have a serious weakness. We don't like to talk about this, man. We call it male mother need. It's not just sex. It's this desire, to have some kind of hovering female Madonna-esque spirit or something like that, who's going to take care of you in your times of need. And we don't like to talk about that. And I think that's part of the problem from a mental point of view, that men, it's relationships are literally a great danger to men, because not every guy can deal well with the breakdown of a serious relationship, never mind a marriage. So men are particularly vulnerable, and that's why to find a woman who's equitable enough to understand that without despising it, because I think most women despise weakness in men, is very difficult.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's I've written on this before, and I've certainly had a lot of discussions about it. We have to wonder why on the battlefield, grown men will call out for their mothers as they're bleeding to death. It happens regularly. The suicide rate being what it is during the process of a divorce or serious breakup, men tend to get really flattened by this. And I've heard some people speculate that it's because men don't have the group support and social support that women do, and there may be some element of truth in that. But I really do think that those things hit men a lot harder, which is why I think it's really good for any man, even if it's for just a little while, to really immerse themselves in a MGTOW lifestyle, to let their brain register the fact that they don't cease to exist without a woman, and that there is elements to life.
It's so tough. It's so tough. I have a good buddy who's nearing becoming the state budget director, director of budgets in Rhode Island. He's very talented. Effectively speaking, he's been MGTOW for 5 or 6 years. I mean, in the sense that he's been trying to get it, just nothing's worked out. And he says, but what's the alternative? It's far. I mean, there's always this idea that if a woman's in place, it's just going to be better, rather than making the best of the situation. So I just don't. I'm skeptical that most men are even able to at least consider the possibility of being alone. Never mind wanting to be. I mean, I want to be, but I think it has a lot to do. I mean, obviously there have been studies on this. The amount of care male infants receive, or rather attention. I think this goes just once they leave the womb. That's where it starts, and it could be in part then socialized. That a man during his entire life, he does not receive the affection and attention that a female child might. And this creates a sort of a gaping wound, if you will, that he has for his entire life that needs to be filled, oftentimes by a woman. And, a sexual partner is the last person to do that, a female, because that's a weakness, and women don't like weak men.
Oh, yeah, and there's also the messages that boys get from a very young age from their fathers about pleasing their mothers. It's a constant drum of you better make your mom happy. I mean, in a lot of cases, the guy's father knows that he's failed to make her happy. What he hasn't woken up to is that there is no way to make her happy. And both parents in a lot of families end up using the male child to try to make the mom happy. And, of course, it fails.
Of the son, yes.
Absolutely. It fails, and then it creates a void in the son that he tries to fill with girlfriends and wives for the rest of his life, and of course he can't make them happy either. I think it sets up a real vicious cycle. It's too bad about your friend, because one of the things that I got after my divorce was a prolonged period of time where I just didn't give a shit. I lived by myself, and I found a lot of pleasure in that. And I think my brain chemistry had to rewire itself to figure out, you know what, I won't die without a woman.
But I mean, as a final, this particular topic, there are guys out there marrying, after, I think Tom Leykis, Tom Leykis, he went through 4, it's just incredible. There's something, for lack of a better word, wrong with a lot of men that they need to go through all the tons. 4 or 5. I met a guy abroad. He was married 5 times before he got it, and even then he's still, thinking about the possibility. I don't understand how much empirical evidence or experience you need. It's a serious weakness, and I think men need to. One, the most important thing is that men openly need to talk about this weakness that we all have. We all, on some level, have this essentially a weakness. I refer off as kryptonite. Women have this. I would say a power, but we are far more susceptible to the fallout of a negative or a bad relationship than women are. It's partially, as you said, probably because women they talk about these things, men tend not to, but also the growing up, the socialization process. Men don't talk about their feelings. They talk about everything under the sun, politics, science, games, whatever. They don't talk. To say I feel this way. For many men, it's an odd confession. I feel this way, because that's just not what men do, and that's also part of the problem, obviously.
What's also interesting, and I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. That men struggle with that, and a lot of times what they do is they take their emotional states to women, thinking that's a sort of a safe, nurturing place, and they find out that it's not. But men are very awkward with that stuff, and at the same time, if you look back through history at all the greatest artists, the greatest musicians, the writers, the people with the truest high degree of emotional genius, of emotional acumen, are almost all men.
I 100% agree with you. Yeah, but I think men are the greater feeling creatures. I think men feel more than women do. They feel more. They just don't talk about it as much. I'd put it that way, maybe.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. Okay, I'm seeing it. James is letting me know that we have some callers. We've got a little over 20 minutes left in the show. We do have some callers waiting. So I've asked them to hold, and I think it's only fair we get them on. So James, by the way, James is not able to screen the calls, so this is going to be, with the way we have the communication set up for this show, this is going to be potluck. We might get somebody brilliant. We might get Ted Bundy. You never know. So let's see what happens.
Fine. Okay.
And James, hello?
All right, first caller, 480.
Yes, welcome to the show. Can you hear me?
I'm not hearing anything.
I'm not hearing
anything. We'll move on to the next one.
Okay, the next caller, you welcome to the show.
Paul, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Who's calling, please?
This is Aaron Cleary, a.k.a. Captain Capitalism.
Welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Good to be on. I had a question for you in Stardusk, and it basically is one of practicality. Do you think we're going to see any kind of effective change within our lifetime, given the amount of energy and kind of like it's trying to turn around an oil tanker to get any kind of change of behavior or even recognition in society, especially among women, let alone is it even worth expending our effort? And probably the best thing we can do is simply go our own way and live whatever finite life we got. So, in other words, is there any hope, or is it just this is what it is?
I'll let Stardust go first.
I do think so. We look at Japan. People often refer to it with good reason. The Japanese government is terrified. The low birth rate, men don't want to do the work until I drop dead of a heart attack at 40 in my office deal anymore. And it's slower in the West. I think it was Paul used the boiling frog analogy a while back. I recall that. So yeah, credit for you for that. So I think it certainly is possible, and I'm convinced that in the next decade or two, assuming we're all still alive, we will see some change, some kind of fallout from men essentially going on strike because it's just not worth it for them anymore. But then again,
I agree with that.
I don't know.
I think another point of it, too, that is really important for me, and this is where I'm just going to be a totally selfish ass about it, is that you're damn right there's going to be a change because I've changed. I'm not going to be in a family court at any time in my future. It's never going to happen to me again. I have an absolute guarantee not to end up in a family court. I have lower risk for a lot of other problems that most blue pill men live at high risk of every day. I'm not going to say I'm immune to them, but I'm certainly at lower risk. And I'm 100% free in my head. There's not a part of me left anymore that feels like that I need to defer to a woman's opinion or to a man's opinion who's doing the hierarchical thing. I've always run on the idea that what the men's movement is doing, more than creating a change in the whole world, is creating a subculture, an intellectual haven for men like Stardusk and like you and myself and the growing number of others that are checking out of all the programming or as much of it as they're able to and finding a way to rethink their lives, to rethink life, to rethink women, to rethink each other, and to re-envision something that is not what they were stamped out to be, either by their biology or the society around them. So I think if, we're talking to three of us here, we've already got change right here. And will it affect the culture-wide? Yeah, I think it will. Stardust brought up the grass eaters. It's a pretty remarkable thing. The Japanese government is freaking out, and they don't know what to do because they can't defend the feminists, they can't defend women, and at the same time, the guys are saying, screw this. I just don't want to be any part of it. So they're doing the same thing that we're doing here in the West, which is sending these messages of these lame messages of shame that these guys are going, yeah, whatever. And it's really a beautiful thing. I think what's happening in Japan is beautiful because eventually, as this grows, we cannot run a society on female narcissism forever. It just doesn't make mathematical sense. It's not going to happen. And sooner or later, somebody or enough people are going to be smart enough to figure out that Bill Bennett and Eve Ensler running around telling young men to man up and find a wife is not going to work very well for them. So at some point, I do think we will have a culture that starts to recognize that you better start honoring your men and you better start looking at what makes it worth it to them to do anything and start addressing
Can I just say something, Paul?
Yeah.
Please just when you say honoring men, I know you agree with me on this. But that is a very potentially dangerous string of words because often that's conflated with the protector and provider, provisioning and what have you.
Oh yeah, but that's not what I mean.
I know. But the blue pillars would say that this is when they do talk about the marriage strike, it's often kind of coined in this. We need to motivate men once again so they can honor their obligations and duties and provide
that's a real good point. Allow me to clarify. When I say honoring a man, when a guy says, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to get a six-pack and put on some video games and enjoy my evening," honor him by shutting the fuck up and staying out of his way.
Yeah,
that's what I mean by
honoring him. But the culture, that's how, and a lot of men buy into it. Yeah.
But I do think when it becomes socially unpopular to bash men, and to criticize them for this nitpicking, whining bullshit that people have been laying on men for 50 years. When that happens, I think you'll see male bashing will become unpopular. And that's another part, I think, of honoring men, is you just quit bashing them. You start treating them with some respect and without expectation for what they're going to do. So, yeah, you're right. I'm glad you brought that up, because this is sort of an automatic thing for me. When I think of honoring men, I'm not talking about paying homage to the dumbass on the white horse that's saying, you know, don't worry, Nell, I'll save you. I'm talking about staying out of men's way and respecting their choices and their individuality without trying to put pressures on them. And so do I think that's going to happen in our lifetime? I think it's possible that it could happen in our lifetime on a very large scale. I think it's kind of maybe a toss of the coin about whether or not it will, but I do believe that eventually it will happen. If not in my lifetime, maybe the lifetime of the next generation. I think we'll get there simply because a system of chivalry in this particular zeitgeist isn't supportable. You have to prop it up artificially, which is what feminism has done, and that's even starting to show the first stressing signs of cracking and buckling as the hypocrisy of the ideology starts to crush the foundation. It's just not supportable. So, yeah, I think it's not only going to happen eventually, I think it's unavoidable.
I'd have to agree. I mean, mathematically, economically, you can't there's not going to be enough production to pay for all this stuff. But I also concur. I'm hoping, I guess it's a little bit selfish on my part, I want to see a spectacular explosion and seeing this thing crash.
The Girl Rights What coined the phrase the fempocalypse, which I've used as well, to her credit, though. That'll be the fempocalypse when things get to that point.
Cool. I'll have to use the term. But it's enjoyable to see the cracks forming already, you know, postponing marriage, people getting married later, stuff like that. But I don't know if it will come crashing down like the U.S. dollar or what, but it's definitely going to be interesting. But listen, thanks for taking my call, guys. I have to take off.
Hey, thank you for calling, and thanks for listening today. I was really glad to get to meet you, by the way.
All right. Yeah.
So thanks again for that call. James, do we have another caller you can put on?
Yes, we do. Just one moment here.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, 716.
Hello. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Hi.
Absolutely. Can you hear me clearly, or?
Absolutely, clear as a bell.
I can hear you.
How are you doing today?
Great. I just wanted to throw in a few ideas about MGTOW, and I've been kind of practicing grass eater and MGTOW for about 10 years before I even heard the term. But one of the things when I talk to people online, they would compare it to the radical lesbian separatism, and which is kind of humorous, but one of the things I wanted to point out is that, in my view at least, one of the things that makes this powerful is changes in society, the atomization, the fact that in a lot of ways, due to the way things are, you know, for example, with the Internet, where you can go on your own, find information about all kinds of things, that because of the atomization of society, men go in their own way, or basically more withdrawing from society, whereas the separatists were building their own communities. And also one of the big differences, I believe, why, people like Hugo Schweitzer and David Futrell are extremely threatened by this is because, A, the MGTOWs are doing nothing illegal and, in my view, nothing even unethical, but B, what they're doing is they're basically taking their disposability and their utility, they're taking it away from society at large. And I think there's much huger consequences than don't marry. In my personal view, and I know we're getting political here, it also goes into things like don't put yourself into things like military service to go die for a war for oil, which you might believe is unethical. Just
and killing men in other countries that never have done anything to you. You know, that's
exactly.
I'm very much anti-war. And Absolutely. Don't. I mean, I'll say this, and whether people agree, anyone listening to this, do your best never to get involved in any American or any military, particularly any American military organization, because it's a giant organism of misery and essentially a murder machine. I mean, and there's no point in killing other men that have never done anything to you for the sake of the U.S. government. And I strongly urge you to renounce that if you're considering it. Sorry.
I'll second that thought too. Is to absolutely reject the idea of military service and the whole idea of patriotism, because that is just a ruse to get you to be willing to sacrifice for this false sense of honor that we were talking about earlier. But I certainly agree with that 100%. And isn't it interesting, don't you think, that when you're talking to MRAs and to MGTOWs, that you keep hearing this same theme that is people that are peaceful? That once you take it, once you start catching on to your disposability and decide that you're not going to be an appliance for the government or for corporate America or for women or for anybody, suddenly that leaves you with nothing but peaceful options in your life.
Right. That's a big part of why I said I believe it's an ethical response. It's about taking yourself out of a situation that uses you for disposability, and that's why I believe there's a lot more to this than don't marry. And when they say don't marry, I mean one of the ironies is if I met the perfect woman, one of the few people who knows my views in real life actually said, for the perfect woman, you would leave this in 2 seconds. You would. And the truth is, I do have a slight desire to have children, and if I did find a woman I could trust with my life, literally, because of the way the laws are, I would love to start a family with her. But the bigger consequences of this whole movement is standing up for yourself and denying your disposability on many levels. And I think that's the reason why it's the most threatening to for example, David Futrell makes fun of MGTOWs all the time, but the thing where he can't really say anything about it is because right. We're taking our disposability out of the system and trying to live our lives as much for ourselves. And
Sir,
the point is,
if I might add something.
Yes.
To what you're saying, and this is a good opportunity to. I mean, I hear this very often that MGTOW are somehow similar to feminists. I mean, there's no prominent MGTOW person, YouTuber or otherwise, that wants to legislate anything. We basically just want to be left alone, discuss our ideas, and do what we enjoy. That has nothing to do with feminism. We don't want the government involved. We want less government involvement. We want as little as possible. We just want to do our own thing. And just because you mentioned how it's sort of being compared to separatist communities, we just want to do our own thing, discuss our ideas, and be left alone and enjoy our lives. That's very different, I think, to feminism. And so that analogy just kind of falls on its face. I just wanted to mention that.
Oh, well, I agree.
I'd like to one other thing, too, myself, is, and this is it, I'm saying this with some amount of humor, but I do think there's a lot of truth in it. If you met the perfect woman, she wouldn't want you to marry her.
Yeah,
exactly.
I would like to have children at some point, and that's kind of, I wouldn't want to be in a conventional situation.
Well, you should always consider surrogacy if you have the money, although it's sometimes... it's not exactly the most certain path, but it's something to theoretically consider. I mean, men who really want children, but rightfully distrust the system, surrogacy is a potential option, and it's something you might want to consider in the future. It is expensive, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if I'm taking this in too far of a tangent, but I did also want to mention one of the things, like arguing with like a lot of people online, is I noticed that men lack reproductive rights. For example, if you get a woman pregnant, you can't perform a paper abortion. But the other side of it is, if you get a woman pregnant and you do want a child, it's her body and it's her choice, and you basically have no say. And another thing is, the whole thing is in France. it's illegal to find out the paternity of your children. So these are issues where, I don't know if it's a MGTOW issue or an MRA issue, but that's something that men really need to discuss their rights, their reproductive rights, and their health more, I think, openly in a public forum.
I couldn't agree more. I want to thank you for your call. We have lots of callers apparently lined up, and we're going to try to take a couple more quick calls before we have to close. We have about 7 or 8 minutes left in the show, so we're going to try to squeeze in a couple more calls to the people that we won't be able to get to. I apologize. Hopefully we can get Stardust back here to do this again, and we could spend a little bit more time on calls. But thank you, sir, for your call, and let's move on and try to get somebody else in here.
Iron John on the line.
Hello, thanks for taking my call.
You're
Paul,
quite welcome.
Stardusk, and James, I hope you're having a pleasant afternoon. I'm enjoying this program. I was wondering if I could speak to Stardusk.
Sure.
Here.
Well, we've never met before. I think you're a bright man. I started watching you on YouTube or listening to you on YouTube because of Barbarossa, but one of the things I haven't quite discovered yet, and I apologize if this was covered already, is how you ended up as a MGTOW. What was the series of events that led you up to that point, and what made you make the final decision to live?
Nothing
if you don't
cataclysmic per se.
but I'm just
I don't mind sharing. I fear other callers might, but I'll try to briefly summarize. Nothing cataclysmic. Just a series of events that led up to a sort of feeling of discontent, or rather just the air smelled funny. The air here being a metaphor for society and the culture and life in general. And I just started doing research. I discovered Dr. Paul was the first stuff I'd ever watched, then Man, Woman, Myth, and Barbarossa, and all these guys inspired me to reflect on my own life and my own relationship to society, and I realized that the whole deal was pretty sour, and in all those relationships I had been in, I never was content. Some of them were just pretty hideous, to be perfectly honest. And that's just nothing. I was never married. But just a sort of and of course, the misery in the media, magazines and their pigs and things along those lines. So, you just become aware of it, and at some point in time, you lack the words to describe it. I think it's people like, or videos like Dr. Paul, Man, Woman, Myth, and Barbarossa that gave an actual description to a somewhat nebulous feeling, and once you get past the nebulous feeling, your feeling becomes sort of fueled with words, and that's pretty much how it all started.
Well, I'm certainly very happy to know that I played a role in setting some other guys on a path that led them to a little bit more happiness. That does my heart some good. We're going to have to wrap up here in just a minute. We're not going to be able to take any more calls. My apologies for those of you who weren't able to get on. Again, I will do my best to get this guy to come back and do this again at some point so we can get some more of your calls in. Let me ask you one question in parting before we go. One of the things that I picked up from your video that sort of launched all this was some talk about MRAs, for lack of a better word, MRAs versus MGTOWs, or the differences. Is there real differences between MRAs and MGTOWs? Now, I mean, other than the obvious that activists are more involved in activism, and a lot of MGTOWs are just really involved in their own lives and pursuing their own interests in other ways. But is there fundamentally, you think, a psychological difference or an awareness difference between MRAs and MGTOWs? Are we on different pages?
This is a question to pop at the end of the show. Oh, boy.
I really put you on the spot here. And I'm really not assessing a value to what you were saying. I mean, I think
then I'll try to quickly respond. I not always, but often, yes. I think not necessarily you, but there are MRAs who try to, in their discourse and I think in their thought process, circumvent human biology. They think that this is sort of it is political, and it's a cultural phenomenon, and it's as Gurwitz would recently said, femaleness is an engine that's been pushing in one direction for potentially millions of years, millennia. So I think 90 seconds. Okay, so I think oftentimes that is a primary difference. They tend to latch on to the political too much, and often do not want to examine the biological. That's not always the case, but I found it often to be the case. So that's my very brief answer to that question at the end of the show.
Okay, good enough. And again, maybe this gives us an avenue in the future to come back and to discuss this some more. I think those are very cogent observations and certainly worth a lot more discussion. And I see we are nearing the end of our show here. We just have 30 seconds left. So I want to first thank you for taking the time to come on and do this.
Well, thanks for having me.
I just took a peek at our chat room. We've drawn quite a crowd today with this, which is very good to see. There was a lot of listeners, and I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing because I know that it's one thing to be a MGTOW. It's another thing to step out there with the ideas and to sort of put your neck on the chopping block for what you believe in. And to me, that makes you an activist. That's a matter of opinion. I'm not trying to put the label on you. But I just want you to know it's appreciated, and I appreciate that you came to the show today.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right, take care. And to everybody, remember, take the red pill.
Yep. All right, bye-bye. Cheers.